Call me crazy, but I think there is a real chance that California voters will vote in favor of a voter ID law this year. I know I didn't believe it either, but after reading everything that I could on this, looking at the polling, this is really interesting. So I want to get right into it. This all started for me with a piece in Politico talking about the GOP targeting California for a ballot fight on voter ID. Now, in case you don't know how ballot propositions work in California, basically if you gather close to 1 million signatures, you can put a proposition on the ballot enacting pretty much anything, even amendments to the state constitution. What we have here is a proposed amendment that would require ID for voting in person or by mail in the state of California. Now, last time I covered voter ID, we were talking about it on the federal level, but I was actually surprised to see that a bunch of you were actually in favor of it, even a lot of the Democrats. And that got me thinking, what's the consensus on this? Is this as partisan of an issue as we think it is? Or is there maybe more overlap than we think is possible? So I went and dove into this Pew Research report talking about exactly this. And right now I'm going to put on the screen one of the most interesting graphs that I found. It's asking a few different questions of Democratic, Independent, and Republican voters on voter ID. And you can see here, if we look at the one on the top right, that when asked about their support for a law that requires all voters to show government-issued photo identification to vote, obviously we can see here that 95% of Republicans are in favor of this. But you can see a huge uptick recently in independent voters, with 83% in favor of it, and even 71% of Democrats. I don't know about you, this totally caught me by surprise. It's just not the conventional wisdom that you hear on cable news or from political commentators when talking about voter ID issues. I thought it was a left and right issue, where Democrats were against it and Republicans were in favor of it. I remember hearing this for years at this point, that these laws disenfranchise voters that vote Democratic and help voters that vote Republican. But these days, I really don't know if that's the case. Now, despite this polling, we're not seeing these same levels of support for the current federal voting ID law that's going through Congress. This is the SAVE Act. We've talked about it before. You can view it up here once you're done with this one. Now, you know what? You can watch it for context if you want to. It was my first video on this channel, so, give me some slack. But the reason this bill is having such a hard time getting through Congress comes down to the fact that it's not just asking for ID to vote. It's asking for proof of citizenship when registering to vote. This is a much higher bar to clear. As of right now, only half of Americans have a valid passport, and for state issue IDs, only 5 states issue current IDs that prove citizenship just with that piece of identification. Pretty much everyone else would need their birth certificate on hand or certificates of naturalization paired with another piece of identification. And if you're a married woman and your last name no longer reflects your documentation, you would need an additional document for proof of name change. So now you're looking at 3 to 4 different documents just to be able to vote. Much higher bar than just bringing your ID to vote. So this has made that piece of legislation much more unpopular. You could argue a more moderate form of voter ID, according to the numbers we looked at, would have a much better chance of passing. So which kind of voter ID legislation are we seeing in California? The moderate or the extreme? Well, I have it here, and it says, quote, "The measure would amend the state constitution to require Californians to show ID for both in-person and mail-in voting, and put the onus on counties and the Secretary of State to verify citizenship." To me, that sounds more like the moderate approach. Now, again, like I said earlier, you need less than 1 million signatures to put this on the ballot. For 2026, the number is exactly 874,641 for propositions amending the Constitution. According to the group that is bringing this proposition up, they've already gathered over 1.3 million signatures. Now, if you follow the process at all for propositions in California, you'll know this is only step 1 of a multi-step process. A lot of these signatures get thrown out, they're duplicates, fake, etc. So you need a good buffer there. But odds are this is going to get on the ballot at this point, if you have this much of a buffer already. So we know how Democrats think of this at large, but what about Californian Democrats? Well, according to a separate poll here, it says that nearly 60% of Democrats in the state support the idea of requiring proof of citizenship when people register to vote for the first time. That's on the more extreme end, remember? And in case you're wondering right now, in the state of California, the only proof that you need is a signature by mail or in person. Now, that signature is under the penalty of perjury, and current and past secretaries of state in California say that this is enough of an incentive for people not to lie. And I think I need to make clear at this point that there are barely any examples in the state of California of doctored ballots in recent elections, but there's clearly support for this. And since the SAVE Act, the federal piece of legislation, probably won't be enacted into law with how tough of a time they're having right now, I think this could be seen as a real win for Republicans. right? And now we're getting into the real thing that I have wanted to talk about for a very long time. And that is the broader question that you might have asked yourself. In the year 2026, with the voters that vote for Republicans and the voters that now vote for Democrats, does voter ID legislation still benefit Republicans? Are the people disincentivized to vote voting for Democrats? And are the people with IDs voting early Republicans? If you've followed these trends in recent years, I think you might have noticed a shift recently. And I have a great piece here from The Atlantic talking about exactly that I want to go over with you guys. In the 2024 election, Donald Trump beat Kamala Harris with voters who didn't regularly participate in elections. And in the low turnout, off-cycle elections that have happened since then, Democrats have vastly outperformed Republicans, which implies Democrats are retaining a sort of stranglehold on voters that are well-educated, well-informed, and plugged in. The type of voters who these voter ID laws tend to not affect very much. So with this trend, I think you can start to see the big point that I want to get across to you guys in this video. The politics of voter ID have not caught up to the realities of the 2026 electorate. I've got a recent poll from YouGov here that shows that 64% of Harris voters reported having a valid passport, compared to 55% of Trump voters. Now, part of this is due to the huge gains that Trump got in 2024 among Black and Hispanic voters, but it's also because passports are especially rare in rural counties where Republicans have thrived for decades. So we're living in a world now where making voting more difficult would actually hurt Republicans. And yet they're really pushing hard to make that happen. Meanwhile, you have Democrats who insist that Trump and the MAGA base is ruining American democracy. And they refuse to help Republicans hurt themselves out of principle, some vague principle that you could argue they adopted because it used to benefit them. And we're already seeing this same tactic play out in California. Now, when the head of a heavyweight Democratic labor group called the SEIU was asked about this was the group that ran the Proposition 50 campaign for Gavin Newsom last year, by the way. They've basically signaled that they're going to campaign against this as sort of a California versus Trump situation, which is exactly how they passed Proposition 50. In case you don't remember, Proposition 50 passed last year, allowing Democrats to temporarily gerrymander the state of California, effectively adding Democratic seats in the House of Representatives through 2030 to combat the gerrymanders taking place in states like Texas. And despite the seeming popularity of this voter ID bill in California, this is important to look out for. If you looked at polling last year for Proposition 50, before it got the number of signatures to get on the ballot, it was actually polling as pretty unpopular. Californians are pretty proud of their independent redistricting passed by Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the day. And yet just months later, groups like this SEIU group and consistent messaging from state Democrats, including Gavin Newsom, was enough to convince enough Californians to push it over the edge so that Proposition 50 effectively passed last November. So I want to end here with a little bit of my commentary on maybe what Democrats should be doing. And I want to start here with something that was said by a Republican strategist in the state of California. When asked about this voter ID measure for 2026, he said that Democrats should use this as an opportunity to push more progressive policy, a universal voter registration, something popular with Republicans as well, basically doing that instead of fighting this bill. Now, this can be used in tandem with voter ID. Universal voter registration is basically where the government maintains accurate voter rolls. It's basically the government doing all of it instead of you. You're automatically registered to vote at 18. You don't need to opt in. It would be an opt-out system. But beyond these sort of additional policy recommendations, I think the answer is much simpler. I'm not saying the Democrats need to pass the SAVE Act at the federal level, but if I were a Democrat in California and my incentive was to get the most votes possible as elections go on in the future, I really wouldn't fight that hard against this. And if we start to see more ballot propositions like this in other states, if I'm a Democrat there, I wouldn't be fighting against this either. It's a very weird place we're in right now. And I have the feeling like we're in the middle of a transition on where the parties stand on this issue. So I don't know. I think it'll be really interesting to see. I especially want to see where Gavin Newsom ends up standing on this. So rest assured, we will be looking at this and following it as the year goes on, along with so much else that's happening in this midterm election cycle. If you find that at all interesting, please subscribe to the channel. We will be covering tons of stuff like this in a semi-daily format. So yeah, see you tomorrow, maybe?